and with the 12th Armored Division Picnic in Emporia, Kansas. Could you please state your name for me?
Everett Riggs, Company C of the 66th AIV.
Myrtle Riggs.
I'd like you to first, and then her, describe your mother and your father, your childhood, growing up, what that was like.
Well, I was born in 21. We grew up in Oklahoma Panhandle where my folks had homesteaded. And it was kind of rough going for everybody back in those days, Dust Bowl days. But we made it through in pretty good shape.
I grew up in the west end of the Oklahoma Panhandle, near Boise City, Oklahoma, at what is known now as Felt, but Felt wasn't there at that time. And I too grew up during the Dust Bowl days, lived through all the stories that everybody else tells about. And we made it through all right. There were 6 kids in my family, my mother and father, and he was a farmer, part of the time a truck driver, part of the time worked on the road in order to have money to survive. But it didn't take much money in those days.
Can y'all tell me a little bit about the Depression and how that affected your life?
Well, it just was a part of the life, and it's kind of hard to say how it affected it because no one really had anything. Everybody just joined together in community activities, and everybody took part. Went mostly by wagon and team, and we just didn't know any other way back then. We thought we was doing all right.
If the drought hadn't come along at the same time as the Depression, it probably wouldn't have affected us as much as it did. But since we weren't raising any crops and weren't having much rainfall, well, it was tough going. I was the oldest in the family, so I was out helping my dad drive a team and right-hand man and come in the house and be right-hand cook in the kitchen.
Can you tell me about your education? What school y'all went to?
I went to grade school. The first 8 grades was in one-room school called Union District 125 in Beaver County, Oklahoma. Then I went to high school in Forgan, Oklahoma, when I went to high school. And can I tell you what she done? Well, she come along and she talked me into this arrangement of getting married and raised me up just like she wanted me. So that's about the end of my childhood then.
I started to school in a one-room school. I went there for 2 years. And then Felt community grew up, the town of Felt, when the railroad came through. And Felt and my school district consolidated. And by that time, we only had 4 grades in one room, so that was quite an improvement. I finished grade school and high school at Felt, Oklahoma, and then went to Goodwill, Oklahoma, to what is now Panhandle. What do they call it now? We used to call it PAMC. Now it's Panhandle State University. And graduated from there. Taught school 2 years before I talked him into getting married. That's where I met him. He was in the other end of the Panhandle from me, and I was teaching there close to where he was.
Can you tell me how you got into the service and when that was?
Well, I got into service in 1944 in July. At that time I was living in Hugoton, Kansas, or about 10 miles out of Hugoton, and I was managing a farm up there for a fellow. And in fact, he kept me deferred for almost a year, I guess, without any knowledge that he was doing it. I just kept getting these classifications and his farm classification, and didn't think much about it until time come that I had to go and report to the draft board, and they more or less accused me of asking for deferments, and I told them I had never asked for one yet. And by that time we had one little girl and another on the way. But they looked at each other kind of odd, and then when they found out who I was working for, he had been on the draft board in Liberal, Kansas, and the lady knew him, and she said, yeah, I knew Harry was doing that. But anyway, then I was inducted shortly after that.
Tell me about your basic training.
Gee, I took that down by Mineral Wells, Texas, and went in basic training in
Camp Walters.
yeah, Camp Walters. That doesn't sound right. Yeah, it was Camp Walters, down west of Weatherford and a little east of.
At what point did you join the 12th Division?
I finished basic training, and I had a 10-day delay en route in late December of '44, and I think it was about the 6th when I caught the Queen Elizabeth and headed overseas. And I went from there right on to the 12th Armored. It was right at the end of the Battle of the Bulge. And deep snow. I believe I was thinking the 17th of January that I joined the 12th Armored Division.
So,
Following the time I got there, I hit the lines a night or two, but I had bad cold, and then I come down with pneumonia, but I stayed with the outfit, and they kept me doctored up till I got on my feet and was going again.
tell me about some of the sergeants and generals who were in charge when you were came into 12th Division.
Well, our outfit, pardon me, our task force fought under Patch, Patton, and DeGaulle. So we were supposed to have been with the 7th Army, but part-time we served with the 3rd Army. And then in the Colmar pocket, when they went in to clean it up, we joined up with the French 1st Army at Colmar.
What was your job in your unit?
Well, by that time I was assistant driver and 50 caliber machine gunner and also bazooka.
Tell me a little bit more about the Battle of the Bulge.
Well, I was only there at the last of it in the deep snow, and I know we had everything, chains on everything that get chains on, even the half tracks couldn't get around through the snow without it. And the worst battle was over. The worst of the battle was over. It was kind of a cleanup detail when I joined. And
Tell me about the operation at Colmar.
well, it was just a cleanup operation. They were kind of cut off in a pocket there, and there very little fighting to it. They surrendered the town, and we just went through and mopped up. But we didn't have any, when we was with the French 1st, any real. The worst scare was meeting the French 1st Army coming in from our right flank, because they came in at night, and if a vehicle had a horn or a light, the lights was on, the horn was honking, and it was the awfulest noise you ever heard. We wasn't sure who it was, and our company commander told us when they sent a runner up the road, they was looking for the captain, and some of us wanted to go in his place so he wouldn't be getting in trouble. And he said, no, I'm going down there myself, and I'm not back in a given length of time. I just come in with everything you got, because it'll be too late anyway, don't worry. But it was the French 1st Army, and he come back in plenty of time to avoid any unnecessary conflict or met into it.
Did you have any experiences with the German prisoners of war?
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, before or after we come back from overseas?
Both.
Overseas, we took a lot of prisoners, especially along about Easter time. In fact, in our Stars and Stripes at that time, there was quite a write-up, and they called it the Easter Parade. The Germans, the basic German people wanted to give up, but the SS troop wouldn't let them. If they were behind them anywhere in sight and they tried to surrender, if they didn't get shot by the American soldiers, they would get shot by the SS troops. They had no respect for their own people.
Did you find a distinct difference between the German soldiers and the SS soldiers?
Well, yes, there was, because the regular German army as a whole didn't want the war any worse than we did. They were just doing a duty for their country. But the SS troop was more hang back and force the other people to do the fighting.
Did you assist in any of the liberations of the death camps?
Yes, there was 2 of them, but I can't tell you the names of them. One of them in particular, we went in and got in of a morning, and they had bulldozers out and had machine gunned a bunch of the people in the prison camp and just taken a dozer and pushed them in just like you would have that much wood or whatever debris that you're trying to get rid of. And we met 2 people as we went in that was near starvation, a young man and a young woman, and she looked to have been, I would have guessed her to have been a middle-aged woman, but she turned out she was just a young woman in her late 20s. She was swollen and looked real bad, and he didn't look, the man didn't look quite as bad, and he was a little older as she did. But they hadn't had anything to eat, and we let them have some sea rations, and we let them eat 2 boxes, which was an over meal, really, and they were still just famished. They wanted more. We couldn't let them have it for their own welfare, but those 2 people give quite a bit of information on what had gone on at the camp, but at the time we got there, most of them had been slaughtered.
Describe for me your duties during the occupation.
Ma'am?
During the occupation, what were your duties?
Well, we just went out from one town to the other and just stood guard duty, and after VE Day was declared until I was on the list to come back to the United States, and I was supposed to be attached to the 86th Infantry and Special Rocket Battalion and go to the Pacific. But when I got back to Camp Kilmer, the Japs surrendered the morning we were lined up to leave there on the train, so I didn't have to go. I got out earlier than some of the guys in the unit that had been in there longer than I had, because the unit hadn't come back yet. But I come back early to go to the Pacific and didn't have to go.
Can you tell me what it was like being at home with your children and anything you did in the war effort or communication with them, kind of general?
I didn't do much in the way of volunteer work as such, because he went in July into basic training. Our youngest daughter was born in August, and so the other girl was 2 in November. So I had my hands full with the 2 children at home. Before he went in, he had moved all of our household stuff to Elkhart, Kansas, and my sister roomed with me. She was teaching school in Elkhart. I had an aunt and uncle and a cousin and her husband who lived in Elkhart. So I was both but correspondence finally got to the point that it was V-mail, and you couldn't write very much on a V-mail letter. But that's where we corresponded.
Can you tell me about when he finally did come home, what that was like?
Well, when they declared the war was over, there was a big celebration in town, and he didn't come home then until when, August?
August.
That he I got home for a few days, and then he had to go back to Oklahoma camp for guarding some prisoners there. And I never did go to camp with him because I had my hands full at home. It was much easier that way.
Well, back at that time, enlisted man pay wasn't such that you could successfully take a family. There just wasn't the money there to take a family around the camp, and if you had them located, it's better off. And,
I can't remember how much money I got during that time, but I got by on it.
But just a little money went a lot further than it does now. And I know you all can't remember back when $5 would buy a week's supply of groceries, but that used to be the case. And now we go to town and you can buy $50 worth of groceries carried out in one hand, and back then you had to have some help to carry it. If you'd have gotten that much groceries, you just couldn't have carried them. It's kind of hard to believe, I'm sure.
Well, I don't know how you got him to marry you. Sounds
what?
like there's some story there about how you got him to marry you. I don't want to hear that.
That's his mother's story, really. I was teaching school there in Beaver, Oklahoma, and we met and was going together. Actually, I think our marriage ended up, the proposal was more an understanding than it was anything else. But
Well, I told you she talked me into it. And,
but
you
his
know,
mother always kidded me about taking him to raise because he's younger than I am.
but there really not that much difference. That's the bottom line of the whole thing. It wasn't that big a gap in our age anyway. But someone starts ribbing you and going to tell your wife this and going to tell your wife that, and that's my reply to them, that she raised me like she wanted me. Go ahead and talk to her, and then they leave me alone. So that's kind of been a joke with us all along.
That's part of our sense of humor.
But we met in church, actually. We both went to the same church, and that's where we actually met.
Well, I want to ask you one more question about what you did when you came back with the prisoners of war.
Well, I was at Camp Walter, or Camp Gruber, Oklahoma, and they had a 1991 Guard Detachment, and I was put in it guarding prisoners, and at that time we had the German prisoners over here, and they were doing farm work, and we had to guard them. And when we first went over there, the officer in charge was sitting back with his feet up on the desk reading the newspaper and smoking a cigarette. There was 4 of us reported for duty over there. No, it wasn't but 3 of us. And we walked in and they told him he was there, and he started asking questions. He said, well, now they take them out to work, and they either want them to work, or he said, you think you can make them work? I said, they'll either work or else. And at that time, he pulled that paper down and seen that all 3 of us were from the European theater. And his feet hit the floor, and we got his attention. And he said, now don't pull none of that. He said, they'll work, just let them work. He said, don't have any doubt in what y'all can handle it. But that was my introduction to the POWs on this side. But we definitely got the officer's attention when we told him we thought we could handle it. And at one point, the group that I had out, I had only one POW that decided it was time to go eat persimmons instead of work. And I called to him, and at that time I knew enough German to call him. But he didn't pay any attention, so I called the interpreter and I told him what to tell him in no uncertain terms. And he started back over there, and I throwed it around in the chamber of that rifle I was carrying, and I said, I told him to come double time, and I mean it, or I'm going to leave him there. And he did come on the double. And he made a real good worker. I had him in the crew various times after that, and no problem at all. We just got along great.
Is there anything else either one you want to say, or
Any story that y'all like to tell that
you have anything else to do?
No, I just wouldn't take $1 million from my experience, but I sure wouldn't want to have to go through it again. And we did raise a son that served in the Vietnam War.
how does that make you feel?
And right now he's a professor at TWU in Denton, Texas.
Give me more questions. I know y'all probably have a lot more to say. But, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, of course, there's always a lot of things you think of later that incidents that come up that probably win with someone else that you've already heard them from, so it doesn't really matter, I guess.
Well, can you think of one right now?
Well, no, not in particular.
Well, if you want to write them down if you remember and then send them to us. Thank you.
We're going to either fill out some forms, and if you want to get a copy of this.
That